On this Saturday night, Trump's incoming tariffs. The U.S. president opens the door to a full-blown trade war with his neighbors.
There could be some temporary short-term disruption, and people will understand that.
The impending economic tailspin for Canada and Mexico. Also tonight, the possible rift for relations.
And so we need to use the market power that Canada has, including 100% tariffs on Teslas.
How might America's biggest trading partners retaliate? Plus, what it could mean for the price of goods and jobs right across North America. Another aviation disaster in America.
Oh, God.
The investigation into an air ambulance plane that crashed in Philadelphia, killing everyone on board. And Lunar New Year excitement.
It's our home, our culture, our heritage.
The buzz as Canadians from coast to coast to coast celebrate the Year of the Snake.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After weeks of threats, speculation and preparation, the United States has now set the stage for a multilateral trade war. The White House confirming tonight that a 25% tariff on Canadian imports will take effect on Tuesday. The Trump administration has communicated its intentions with the Canadian government, saying the crippling levy will be imposed on virtually all goods traveling south, the exception being Canadian energy products, oil and natural gas, which will face a 10% tariff instead. Mexico and China are also in the crosshairs, each being hit with 25% and 10% tariffs, respectively. And you're looking at a live shot inside the West Block on Parliament Hill, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to speak. And what Canadians are waiting to hear from him is, how will our country respond? Mackenzie Gray is following all of these developments from Ottawa. Mackenzie.
Canada is poised to enter into its biggest trade war in our country's history, Carolyn, with Donald Trump following through on his tariff threats that he's promised for months.
An ally does not do this to an ally, so we have to assume that the United States is not an ally for Canada anymore.
It's not something you'd expect a friend to do. Starting Tuesday, any Canadian goods sold to the U.S. will face a 25% tariff, except energy, which will be taxed at 10%. The reason the White House is given? Fentanyl. Canada has played a central role, including by failing to devote sufficient attention and resources or meaningfully coordinate with United States law enforcement partners to effectively stem the tide of illicit drugs. But the Americans' own numbers show that less than 1% of fentanyl coming to the U.S. comes from Canada, but that doesn't seem to matter to the White House. Fentanyl is so potent that even a small parcel of the drug can cause many deaths and destruction to American families. Ontario's premier not buying that reasoning.
What's really disturbing when President Trump is using fentanyl as a reason, lumping us in with Mexico and China.
On CNN, Doug Ford promising Canada will punch back swiftly.
It's unfortunate. We don't want to do it. We'd rather have a strong trading partner with the U.S.
The Prime Minister held a cabinet meeting, spoke with the premiers and the Mexican president. Tonight, he'll announce retaliatory tariffs. Details aren't clear, but some premiers are already outlining what they'll do. Nova Scotia and BC no longer buying U.S. alcohol for provincial stores.
We will never again allow ourselves to be beholden to the whims of one person in the White House.
But regardless of what the response is to the tariffs, it will be disastrous for the Canadian economy.
Well, there's about 55 production plants, auto assembly plants across North America. They will come to a halt.
Which Flavio Volpe believes will lead to hundreds of thousands of layoffs in the auto sector. But it's not just cars. The Bank of Canada has predicted layoffs in every part of the economy, a recession, and increased inflation once the tariffs come into place. Canadians swiftly showing how they feel. The American anthem loudly booed at tonight's Ottawa Senators.
The U.S. has also inserted a clause into the executive order saying if Canada puts retaliatory tariffs in place, they would raise their tariffs they just brought in, Carolyn, but that does not seem to deter the Canadian government.
Mackenzie, more information is coming out about Trump's executive order this hour. What can you tell us?
Yeah, he's spoken at length with different journalists, at least the White House has, talking about who's going to be in charge of kind of leading this effort. Marco Rubio is one of the two people involved. He's the Secretary of State. And Melanie Joly actually just met with him a few weeks ago. We'll see if that relationship can help Canada get out of these tariffs. The White House again saying, if you want to get rid of these tariffs, you need to make sure that there's no fentanyl coming to the U.S. Not really buying the argument that there's only 1% of the fentanyl that comes in from to the States coming from Canada. Some key other things to think about in terms of the retaliation that we might hear from the Prime Minister. He was set to speak at 8:30 Eastern. That's pushed back to 9 Eastern now. We've heard from government sources for an extended period of time that they had a $37 billion tariff plan ready to go in place that would escalate to $110 billion. And then kind of a third round where energy and other things could potentially be stopped from going into the U.S. We'll see what Mr. Trudeau has to say. But it's not just the Premier's focusing on alcohol as well, too, that we mentioned in my story. They're also saying in BC and Nova Scotia that they'd like to cancel U.S. contracts that they have with big companies. So the real focus from the Prime Minister and the Premiers will be trying to inflict maximum damage on U.S. officials while still keeping some powder dry if they need to escalate things further down the road.
Significant developments. Thank you, Mackenzie. Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa for us tonight. Americans rely heavily on their neighbours to the north and south for trade and stocking shelves with everyday goods. According to U.S. government statistics, in 2024, Mexico was America's largest trade partner, followed by China and Canada. Together, Canada and Mexico make up a little more than 28% of all imported goods into the U.S. The U.S. imported $466 billion worth of goods from Mexico and $377 billion from Canada last year. Canada and Mexico are among the largest suppliers of agricultural products to the U.S., including vegetables, livestock, and meat. Trump's incoming 25% tariffs on Canadian goods will undoubtedly hurt this country's producers, but the ripple effect will be felt by millions of American families as well. Reggie Cecchini has more on what Trump's tariffs will mean for relations, jobs, as well as the price of everyday goods.
Americans may not put much thought into the growing rift in relationships to the north and south, but that could change. This new invisible wall of tariffs being built by Donald Trump could act as a barrier for millions of American families.
There could be some temporary short-term disruption, and people will understand that.
It was a stunning admission that there would be consequences to tying border security issues to trade. And now a tariff on the nearly $1 trillion worth of imports from Canada and Mexico will do the exact opposite of what Trump campaigned on.
The price of household goods will start to plummet. Groceries and rent will no longer break your budgets.
We calculate 1.2% increase in average prices. And that may sound small, but hey, inflation is a big story. Inflation is why the Fed won't cut its interest rates.
That isn't something that's being sold to the American public, who instead have been told a tale of a time no one remembers.
We were at our richest from 1870 to 1913. That's when we were a tariff country. And then they went to an income tax concept, and, how did that work out?
Back then, tariffs on dutiable imports to the U.S. reached as high as 50% before free trade policies were embraced. It's now at risk and could result in potential disruptions to the global economy.
25% is a very big number, and so the fallout is not going to be trivial.
Hours ahead of the tariff deadline, concerns were voiced, including from the National Association of Home Builders, warning of a potential slowdown in domestic home construction, impacting housing affordability. The burgeoning trade war was far from mind at Trump's Florida golf course, where he started his Saturday, but is a glaring reality coming into focus, that the tariff tit-for-tat is likely to become an economic avalanche.
You're going to get unemployment in the U.S. firms that export to Mexico and Canada. It takes time to change your selling pattern.
Reggie, is there any sense of what Trump hopes to gain with these tariffs?
Well, Carolyn, President Trump is seeking to extend and expand trillions of dollars in tax cuts that typically benefit the wealthiest, but there's little money for that. The U.S. pulls in less than $100 billion annually in trade penalties, and these tariffs will help fill the coffers, but they'll be paid for off the backs of the American consumer. So the president needs to build trust in his plan while bracing for the blowback, including from the markets, which are important to Trump. If Wall Street tanks on Monday, he will take notice, and his reaction could mimic any next steps. Carolyn?
Reggie Cecchini in Washington, thank you. And a little later in the newscast, I'll speak with former Deputy Prime Minister and current Liberal leadership candidate Chrystia Freeland about how she thinks Canada should respond to the tariffs. Turning to other news now, and another deadly plane crash in the U.S., this time involving a pediatric air ambulance in Philadelphia.
Oh, God.
Dashcam video captured the moment the plane suddenly lost altitude and slammed into the ground below. It happened around 6:30 Friday evening near a busy mall. Officials say all 6 people on board were killed, including 4 crew members and a mother and her daughter who was receiving treatment at Philadelphia Hospital. All 6 people were Mexican nationals.
At least one other person perished in this tragedy, and this individual was in a car. We can confirm that there are also a number of other victims who were injured in this incident, and they are being treated in area hospitals. And thus far, our count is that there are 19 injured victims.
Officials say it's entirely possible there could be more deaths discovered among the damage. In the Middle East, Hamas has released another group of Israeli hostages from Gaza in return for the release of more Palestinian prisoners and detainees. It is the 4th exchange to take place as part of the ongoing ceasefire. Vincent McAvenny reports.
Almost 16 months after Hamas kidnapped them, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon were paraded through the ruins of Khan Yunis to be handed over to the Red Cross. The chaotic, crushing crowds which drew the ire of Israel on Thursday's exchanges were gone, but the lines of armed Hamas fighters were still present. 2 hours later, in Gaza City, US-born Keith Siegel was forced to pose on this coastal stage for his handover. More orderly again, but no less dramatized, with Hamas camera crews and drones capturing the moment, seeking to project that the group remains the governing force in Gaza. Soon there were emotional reunions with family for all 3 men. For Keith Siegel, the first of 7 American Israelis released, it included reuniting with his wife, Adrienne, who was also kidnapped by Hamas and released separately. But for Yarden Bibas, he returned alone. Abducted with his wife, Shiri, and their 2 young sons, Ariel and Kafir, Hamas claims they were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Israel then released 183 Palestinian prisoners who were coached back to Gaza and the West Bank. Dozens were serving long or life sentences, but most are detainees arrested in Gaza during the war and held without trial or charge. In the south of Gaza, another significant milestone. The first wounded Palestinians were evacuated to Egypt over the just reopened Rafah border crossing. There's another month left of this phase in the ceasefire. Talks are set to restart next week on freeing the remaining Israeli hostages and a full end to this war. But for now, those caught up in it are cherishing every moment and breakthrough in this reprieve. Vincent McAvenny, Global News, London.
Up next, she dealt with Trump and his trade representative in his first term. Coming up, former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland on how Canada should hit back. That's next. Returning to our top story now, in the U.S. tariffs on Canadian exports, which have been officially announced and will start on Tuesday. To talk more about how this may play out in the days ahead, we're joined by the former Deputy Prime Minister and current Liberal leadership candidate, Chrystia Freeland. Thanks for being with us today.
Great to be with you, Carolyn. It is really an existential moment for Canada, and thank you for reporting on it.
Well, you've been vocal about the need for strong and precise responses to President Trump's tariffs. What does that look like in your opinion?
Well, we need to be united, strong, and smart. We need to recognize this is a critical moment for our country. We need to recognize that we can get through this and we can win, but we can only do that if we do the right things. So what I think we need to do today is publish a detailed retaliation list. It needs to be big, bigger than our retaliation ultimately will be. It should be $200 billion worth, and it needs to be very specific, because what we need to recognize is President Trump doesn't really care about us. He cares about Americans. And so we need to use the market power that Canada has as the largest export market for the U.S. to activate those internal stakeholders in the U.S. and get them to say to the president, wait a minute, this is going to hurt us.
Is there not a risk, however, that retaliatory tariffs will only turn up the temperature with this president instead of using diplomacy to cool it down and to find a way out of this?
Look, the reality with President Trump is the only thing he respects is strength. For this president, weakness is a provocation. The only way that we're going to get through this is by showing him that we're not scared, by showing him, hang on a minute, Canada is your biggest market. We're larger than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. I think a lot of Canadians are feeling really angry. And so I think each one of us needs to use our own personal power. When we go out buying groceries today, let's buy Canadian. And if you can't find a Canadian product, be sure not to buy American. Boycott them as long as they're beating up on us. I think each one of us can have our personal retaliation. It will make us feel better, it will make us feel stronger, and it's going to help our country to win.
Let's talk about that for a second, because you did have experience negotiating with the first Trump administration for several years. So based on your knowledge and that experience, what should Canadians be bracing for here?
I think we should be bracing for a lot of tough language. We should be bracing for them to push us as far as they can. That's how President Trump operates. He senses weakness, and if he senses it, he keeps on pushing. So we need to recognize that. We need to be strong in response. And then the third thing that we need to do is look for allies and partners around the world. Let's remember, Canada has a trade deal with the EU. We have a trade deal with the countries of Asia. Let's talk to those allies and those partners, because a coordinated international response will give us even more strength.
President Trump is saying among the reasons for the tariffs are issues with border security and fentanyl flowing into the U.S. from Canada. Do you think that's what this is really about?
Look, it seems like the Americans have a new reason every day, right? Right now it's fentanyl. There was a while when it was asylum seekers. Sometimes they've been talking about the trade balance. I think we have to recognize that this is really a movable feast, and there's a new rationale every day. What is really going on is a bully trying to push us around, and what we need to do is be strong, say we are not intimidated, have a retaliation plan, including 100% tariffs on Teslas that targets the U.S. stakeholders Trump cares about. Give them an exit ramp and say to Americans, come on, guys, it doesn't have to be this way. We are your best ally, neighbor, friend, and partner, and we can continue to be that if you just stop beating us up and work hard with our allies.
Chrystia Freeland, thank you for your time today.
Great talking to you.
And Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney issued his own statement late today, calling the tariffs a clear violation of our trade agreements that require the most serious trade and economic responses in our history, including dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs. Ahead, what fire officials are saying about those blazes that destroyed so much of L.A. That's next. More than 3 weeks after they first erupted, 2 huge fires in Los Angeles are now completely contained. The Eaton fire ravaged the east side of L.A., while the larger Palisades fire scorched the city's west side. These 2 major fires, plus several smaller ones, resulted in 28 deaths and destroyed more than 16,000 structures, the worst natural disaster in L.A.'s history. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Central America this weekend to send a message that the U.S. wants to reclaim control over the Panama Canal. His visit was met with protests as Panamanians say the U.S. is once again imposing its will over them. Trump's envoy to the region has suggested Panama should let U.S. Navy and Coast Guard ships transit the canal for free. Meanwhile, a Trump envoy to Venezuela has secured the release of 6 Americans. It's unclear what most were detained for, but at least 2 were accused of trying to enter the country illegally. The men were freed after discussions with President Nicolas Maduro, who agreed to take back illegal Venezuelan migrants from the U.S. Bundling up to celebrate, Montrealers braved the cold to welcome the Year of the Snake. That's next. A vibrant display of sound and color in Edmonton's Kingsway Mall today, one of a number of locations in the city and across the country welcoming the Year of the Snake. Holding those celebrations indoors was necessary, with temperatures dipping below -20 in Edmonton, and it was nearly as cold in Quebec, where Dan Spector captured the celebrations in Montreal's Chinatown.
Dozens of dancers dazzle a huge crowd as they make their way through the heart of Montreal's Chinatown to celebrate the Lunar New Year.
It's our home, our culture, our heritage.
This is the 3rd annual parade put on by the city's East Asian community to mark the Chinese New Year. 7 days of festivities welcoming the Year of the Snake culminate with a series of weekend events, including this one.
Our New Year's is a whole celebration of family, community, and spirit.
It's one of the largest Chinese New Year parades in Canada. A major attraction is the spectacular lion dancers. Hopefully those costumes are helping keep them warm in temperatures flirting with -20. But the hundreds of people who came to watch don't seem fazed by the freezing cold.
It's a joyous thing, you know, it makes me happy to be Canadian. And a Montrealer.
It shows that they really want to learn about their neighbors, about other cultures that are vibrant in Montreal, and especially for the Chinese community. They've been here for so many generations, so it's nice to see some solidarity from other Montrealers.
The Year of the Snake can symbolize transformation, growth, and renewal, and that's what they're hoping for here in Chinatown.
The Chinatown merchants have been through a lot since the pandemic.
COVID made the area a target for racism. Montreal's drug addiction and homeless crises haven't helped either. But events like this are a breath of fresh air for merchants.
We love to see Chinatown busy. We love to see people in our businesses. We love to see people seeing the performances and the cultural events.
Hundreds coming together to show their love for one of the city's most vibrant communities.
新年快乐，恭喜發財, which means Happy New Year, and wish you good fortune and luck.
Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is Windsor Lake, Newfoundland and Labrador. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.